Hello, I'm Abby Livingston, the Washington Bureau Chief for the Texas Tribune. Thank you for tuning in to our conversation for what the Biden administration means for Texas. I'm joined today by two esteemed members of the Texas delegation, U.S. Representatives Michael McCaul and Marc Veasey. Congressman Veasey is a Democrat from Fort Worth and has represented the Texas 33rd Congressional District since 2013. He is a member of the Energy and Commerce Committee and also the House Armed Services Committee. Congressman Veasey has served as an assistant regional whip in the U.S. House and is a member of the Congressional Black Caucus and the New Democrats Coalition. Congressman McCaul is an Austin Republican who's represented the Texas 10th Congressional District since 2005. He is the Republican leader of the Foreign Affairs Committee, and previously he was the chairman of the House Homeland Security Committee. Previously, Congressman McCaul was chief of counterterrorism and national security to the U.S. Attorney's Office in Texas. Let's get started. So, Congressman, both of you all, this has been a trying week for the state of Texas, but it's also the first, I suppose we can consider COVID a huge crisis for the Biden administration, but this is the first real new crisis. And I'm going to start with Congressman McCaul. How do you rate the Biden administration's response to the winter storm fallout in Texas?
Actually, I would give them very high marks. We sent a delegation letter for emergency assistance from FEMA that when I chaired Homeland, worked very closely with. They provided immediate assistance to the state of Texas. And then Kay Granger and Kevin Brady and I signed a letter to President Biden asking for a full emergency disaster declaration that the entire delegation then signed on to. And I was pleased as of yesterday that he granted that emergency declaration, which really it means a lot for Texas because it's going to bring not only logistical support through the emergency, but with the disaster, will bring in a lot of financial assistance to the state to help us rebuild the damage that was done by this Arctic blast that we haven't seen since the 1890s.
Congressman Veasey, how do you see things?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I give the Biden administration much credit for acting very swiftly, making the declaration. It's going to help, I think, especially in districts like mine that are, very low income. I represent one of the lowest income districts in the entire country. And I think that for nonprofits and families and people that are underinsured or uninsured, that this declaration will go a very long way in helping them rebuild their lives and their businesses and communities, particularly when you couple that with everything that was happening in lower income communities with COVID-19, because a lot of them were even more adversely impacted than other parts of the state and communities like them. So I think that for them to be able to perhaps have some of this declaration money to start to rebuild these communities are going to be key because people were hit very, very hard. It was, something that we don't ever want to visit in the state again.
So this is a difficult question for me to ask because I, just like everyone else in the state of Texas, am very proud of the homeland. And I have struggled being a Washingtonian who also is from Texas and hearing people from other states say, what is going on here? Or in tougher conversations along the lines of, we told you so. We've been reminded, I'm sure both of you all, that many Texas Republicans did not support Superstorm Sandy aid. There are Northeasterners who are still mad at Texas for that. How does Texas, one, get its swagger back? And what would you tell folks like that? And I'll start with Congressman Veasey.
I would say that, I think the partisanship has just, reached a certain level in this country that's just unacceptable. And even some of the answers that were given by some of the Republican leaders on New Green Deal and different things like that were really ridiculous and really didn't, deserve a space in the public forum. I think we have to move away from that. I mean, when you go back and you think of leaders that we've had in the past in the state, like Lloyd Bentsen, for instance, and I'll even say on the Republican side, Kay Bailey Hutchison, We want people that are going to reflect this state in a bipartisan manner when it's time. And we know that people are going to be Democrats and going to be Republicans, but when it's time to really step up and people are suffering like they were during the storm, we really need to dial back on the partisanship and put Texas first. And I think that's how we can shine in the spotlight once again. When people from New York were going through what they had to suffer and endure during Hurricane Sandy, that was very real. Again, just like what happened with us, people had their lives completely destroyed. I'm sure the lives were lost. It was very, very serious and catastrophic. And we should all come together, and our leaders should reflect that kind of will, like people showed us during what we just endured.
And Congressman McCaul?
Well, I think, Texas, our true character, really shines greatly in a time of crisis. And I say that because I've been through many since this is my 9th term in Congress. We've gone through many hurricanes, droughts, but we all come together as Texans, and we don't check our political stripes. We come together as Texans and as Americans. When the hurricane hit up in New Jersey, I voted for that funding because, it's our duty to help Americans wherever a natural disaster takes place. And so I thought it was important that we do that and not try to regionalize the nation. I was on, Fox News earlier. They quoted Schumer saying that Texas had a few lessons to learn from New York, and we just sort of laughed that off as a kind of a joke. But having said that, I know that there are people from New York and other states raising money for Texas. And it's a time we do all come together. And I think there are going to be lessons learned like we have in all these critical incidents. And I think the biggest one here is how to winterize our energy systems so this doesn't happen again. The state legislature in 2011 wrote a report after we had a pretty hard freeze that year about how to winterize not only windmills, but also our natural gas systems. And I think Mark is correct in this. It's been spun. This is the first time I've seen this spun so politically in a natural disaster where we're making it into a Green New Deal versus oil and gas. The truth of the matter is about 25-30% of ERCOT's energy comes in from solar and wind. Now, that was knocked out by a lot of the ice. But at the same time, when you got 70% coming from natural gas and coal that was shut down due to the weather and the weather, the freezing temperatures, that is what I think guys like Mark and myself can work together on as Texans to fix and to get the federal dollars with the state money. And I know the state legislatures are going to be taking a close look at this, to get this thing fixed so we don't have to go through what we did ever again.
So the central question, well, I'll backtrack. I'm actually going to take a reader question. So Paul, one of our readers, asks, what's the future of the Texas energy grid? And I'm going to tailor the question for each of you based on your committee assignments. Congressman McCaul, you're former Homeland Security Chairman. When I watch this, and I claim to know nothing about cybersecurity, but it does scare me in the sense that the grid can go down or be threatened. Should we be at all worried from a cybersecurity front about this?
Well, that is a positive of ERCOT. And as I stated in my national security prism, having our own grid was always a positive because in the Northeast, the grids are all tied to each other. So if one grid goes down, it has a domino effect on the other grid, so it can shut down the entire Northeast. We always pride ourselves on a security standpoint that we had our own grid. Now the downside to that is that we're not able to tap in and share power from other grids. It would have been nice to have done the last week. And so we weren't able to do that. And I think we need to find that compromise where we can tap into other grids, but keep it isolated, keep it, secure. And I do think this winterization that I was talking about, working as a delegation together is when we have the most strength on Capitol Hill. Republicans and Democrats, we have the largest delegation. And when we send letters and we talk about it, it gets attention. And I think I look forward to working with Marc on this very important project.
So Congressman Veasey, on this question for you, you're on the Energy and Commerce Committee, and this is where the grid there's oversight of it. I've learned a lot about it in the last week, and it's been explained to me that this is a big problem nationally, even though they're not connected, that the infrastructure is wearing down. What is the likelihood of some kind of infrastructure addressing this?
We have to figure out some way how to address it. I think that we need to be transparent about all of it. I think that if there's one thing that I was always worried about, that I think the rest of Texans have learned, is that a lot of this is just so obscure and so hard to follow. What ERCOT and exactly what their role is, what sort of oversight is exercised over ERCOT. The fact that we have power and the PUC is under control of power, and then the Railroad Commission actually regulates gas. And so, two of these very critical entities that were critical to our grid are actually have oversight in two different agencies. And people don't even know what the Railroad Commission is. Most Texans think it has something to do with railroads, and it doesn't. It has to do with oil and gas. And so I think just erasing the sort of secrecy around all of this is a big step in the right direction. And then we have to be upfront about how much it's really going to cost to be able to do that. I think that we can probably reasonably winterize our wind turbines. But when you start talking about enclosing, gas infrastructure pieces, for instance, and doing and actually, putting them inside of a structure, how they do in the Northeast or in the Midwest for the severe winters that they have. Now you're really talking about some real money and being able to do this to where, if we do have, 5 degrees again, we can make sure that people can keep the heat on. And so that's completely different. So how much that's going to cost, we know that with the deregulated market that we have, that there have been people that have complained about the price of their electric bills, since we moved in that direction. And I think a lot of people are unfortunately going to be surprised this time around too. And so if we're going to pay for all of these things, we have to be as upfront with the public on how that's going to be done, where the money's coming from, and then sell it to the public so they'll know that we're doing this to make sure that what we experienced in 2021, doesn't happen again.
So we all saw the news last week of Senator Cruz going to Cancun. But I've been scratching my head in a larger sense. It seems like so much of the leadership in the communities has come from the state legislators, the congressional delegation, and even former Congressman O'Rourke and a New York Congresswoman named Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Have statewide officials been effective in leading the state through this? And I'll start with you, Congressman Veasey.
I think that in my opinion, and Mike and I will probably have a different opinion about this. I think that, for so long in this state, we just haven't had, very many state, very close, contested races. Beto versus Ted Cruz is a very tight race, but really you'd have to go, back until 1994, the last time that we had like a really, close race in the state. And I do think that has affected leadership in the state. I think that has made statewide leadership a lot less responsive than perhaps they had been in from 1994 going back. And I think that it's a big problem. And when people think that they can get away with whatever they want to, they usually try to do that. And so I do think that that in the future, I hope that we have more thoughtful answers in times of disaster. I hope that we have a better response from statewide leaders in engaging the entire, delegation on different things like this in a bipartisan manner. I mean, the fact that I'm a Democrat and, I haven't been updated by our statewide leaders, by our governor, other people that are in Austin, on exactly how this is affecting the state. I think it's unfortunate that, when we rarely have meetings on things of importance, that the questions are usually like pre-screened, that we just can't have like a back and forth dialogue. I think that's a huge problem. And I think that it holds Texas back and we have to figure out a way how to do better.
Congressman McCaul?
Yeah, I think, unfortunately, I think the times that the members of Congress interact with the state legislatures during redistricting for obvious reasons. And, and that's really a shame. I think I try to interact with those in my district and in the statewide leadership, but I think we're most effective if we can work really together, as Texans. And there's a real opportunity there to do that. And I do think going into this issue of weatherizing our systems, the state's this is one of their highest priorities now going into their session, and it's going to be a big priority for us in the Congress. So I think we're going to have that opportunity, because I think most people are asking the question, how could the number one capital of energy in the world, Texas, not have power sufficient to heat its homes? And that is a paradox. And that's where you got to look at that report in 2011 and the implementation and the recommendations made. And I do think that should be very much a bipartisan issue. I have to be honest. I worked with John Cornyn as Deputy Attorney General for many years. I think he really has the best interest of the state at heart. He works very hard on policy issues. And I miss the days of Kay Bailey Hutchinson that Mark mentioned, because everything she did, it was always about Texas. It was always about Texas first. And she, even though we branched off to our Republican lunches, Democrats had their lunches, she always maintained to have bipartisan delegation breakfasts. And she really, truly believed in Texas and their constituency. And, I'm not going to go into Cancun and all that, but I think as elected officials, you kind of have a duty to be responsive to your constituents, particularly in a time of crisis when they really need you the most. I was able to keep 2 assisted living homes operational and a hospital in my district. They were getting ready to go out of power. And that's when they need you.
And now I'll turn to the response to the COVID-19 epidemic. And I'll turn to our reader, Nina, who asks, when will we see a more efficient distribution of the coronavirus vaccine along with a streamlined registry? And I'll throw into that as well. If you, and we'll start with Congressman McCaul, if you could also rate the Biden administration's response to the pandemic 1 month in.
He's made a top priority, and he did in the campaign, and I think that's doing the right thing. I think his plan is not very different from what was being implemented previously, and that's 100 million doses by March. And the sooner we get an inoculated population, the sooner we get back to normalcy. I do have to give credit, however, to the prior administration, particularly the scientists at work, the federal government working with the private sector and these pharmaceutical companies to get a vaccine in 8 months, where normally you look at other ones like Ebola taking 6 to 8 years. Operation Warp Speed was one of the most successful miracles of science I've seen in my lifetime. And it's going to save this nation from this pandemic, which has unfortunately taken 500,000 lives already. We have a ceremony at the Capitol tomorrow, on that. But I think clearly, I'd like to see more of this in this appropriations bill, the COVID bill. I'd like to see more of this money going out to delivery and to more vaccines being manufactured and delivery of the vaccine itself, because that seems to be the inherent problem. Everybody wants to get vaccinated, or most people do. They just can't get access to it. And I think until that happens, we're going to continue to have these problems.
Congressman Veasey?
Yeah, I'm really happy with the direction that the current administration has taken us. I think that, for the constituency that I represent in particular, which is a predominantly Hispanic and Black community, that a lot of the stories that came out about, wanting to downplay the virus, some of the Woodward, stories that were out there about, there being just a lot of, just almost a level of purposely confusing the public on what COVID was really all about. I think it really scared people. I think there was a lot of mistrust. And so we're trying to get into the communities and get people to go and get tested at centers that are already in their communities. And I'm hoping that with the president, saying that he's going to use the War Production Act to rapidly ramp up production of new vials and trying to get 10,000 people a day vaccinated at certain sites, I think that it'll go a long way. I know here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, Texas Motor Speedway up in Denton County, which is far north Fort Worth, that their goal is to do 10,000 a day. But right before the storm hit, at Cowboy Stadium, AT&T Stadium, that was going to be a 10,000 site per day area. And same with Reliant down in Houston. And once you start talking about inoculating that many people in these major urban areas, I do think that it'll go a long way. And so I thought that was a great idea by the administration to do that. I also think working with local community partners that they've started to do now, like I know that Walmart, you can go on their website and do shots, and local drugstores soon be able to do that. I hope that we see more of an effort to get into these communities where we still see very low vaccination rates with perhaps mobile units at churches and local schools and other nonprofits. Communities that have been more hardly impacted by COVID-19 can also achieve a certain level of inoculation so we can get kids back to school. We can reopen our businesses and start to resume life, somewhat more normal than it is right now.
So my next question is about January 6th. I mean, it's looking back. I think one of the hardest things about this is so many Texans have never been to the U.S. Capitol, and it is one of the most majestic, perfect buildings in humanity. And I think it's hard to also translate just how terrifying that day was. And so I want to start with Congressman Veasey. And please try to be brief, but can you walk us through what it was like that day for you? And was there ever a point when you thought you might die?
What's interesting, Abby, is that I was actually a couple of blocks away when it all happened. And the night before, there was a woman there that had obviously came, for this, for the protest that was going to take place on the 6th. But it was when votes were concluding and it was getting kind of dark. So I'm assuming it was around 5 o'clock, 5:30, somewhere around there. And I'm walking back towards Navy Yard. And there was a woman that was just cursing out one of the Capitol policemen. I mean, just letting them have it. And it had something to do with the crosswalk. And just with some of the rhetoric that, was going on out there, and watching this woman just completely just go off on this police officer. I was just like, you know what? I think I'm going to hang back. And the House, Nancy Pelosi had told our speaker had told us, she said, look, we don't want a lot of people on the House floor because of COVID-19, but, we don't know when the vote's going to be called. So you need to be nearby. So, we encourage people to watch this in their offices. And I was heading to the Capitol, and I saw and I got a text message from the Capitol Police saying, if you're in your office, lock the door, be quiet, and turn off the lights. And, that was enough for me to stop going up there. And it was absolutely, it was scary. And I can remember walking up to the Capitol that night when they finally called votes. And I was just like looking around. I was like, if one of these people jump on me or something, what am I going to hit them with to get them off of me? Because it was dark, and I was walking up to the Capitol by myself. And after seeing what happened, I was like, and hearing about the pipe bombs, like we have to walk so close to the RNC club and DNC clubs every day when we walk to the Capitol. And I was just like that. It was very sobering to think that all that happened and that people were really there to cause death and destruction. It's very sobering and still, to me, sad to this day.
And Congressman McCaul, how about you?
It was a very dark day, dark chapter in American history, desecrating our symbol of democracy. I go back to our oath to the Constitution to support the Constitution from all enemies, foreign and domestic. And for many of my years in counterterrorism, it was foreign enemies. And that day were domestic enemies. And, domestic terrorism is an issue we need to deal with. The people there that day, in my judgment, were domestic terrorists. I never thought that we'd have our own people invade the Capitol in an insurrection quite like that. I was headed to the floor when the alarms went off. I went back in my office, barricaded myself in, and then we heard them outside. And according to an eyewitness account, they were dressed in paramilitary uniforms. We put the couch against the door, and all I had, Abby, was a baseball bat, a Louisville Slugger to protect myself and my staff as they were trying to break down the door. And we heard the Capitol Police show up, and there was a bloody exchange, and then they left. But as Mark said, it's hard to describe. Even a lot of the staff kind of having post a little bit of PTSD from a day like that. The great thing is we went back and we got our job done, and we did certify the Electoral College. I blame the rhetoric for the violence. I blame the leaders who lied to the American people that somehow Congress was going to overturn this election. We all knew that was not going to happen. I went to law school, practiced at the Justice Department for many years. I know the Constitution. It does not afford us the ability to overturn an election. We authenticate and count the votes. And what they were trying to perpetuate was this lie that somehow Congress would come in and overturn the election. And when the vice president came out with a statement that the Constitution would not allow him to do that, that's when you saw the hang Mike Pence nooses. And they got pretty darn close to him right out the Senate floor. It was total chaos and pandemonium. And I just hope that politicians and leaders in this country will take note of that. It's important to be honest and tell the truth to the American people and not spin some lie and conspiracy theory and rhetoric that culminates in one of the most violent attacks on the Capitol since the War of 1812.
Congressman McCaul, I'll ask a follow-up. Some of your party's leaders are still telling the lie. How does the GOP get a handle on this?
I think January 6th was a setback for my party because they see it largely responsible. Those people do not represent the Republican Party that I know, and certainly not the party I signed up for. And we voted on a resolution condemning groups like QAnon and left and right-wing extremist groups. But I would like to give the FBI and prosecutors the ability to, domestic terrorism is defined under the Patriot Act. They just want to have charges for that. I'd like to see them equipped with charges and sentencing guidelines for domestic terrorism, as well. And with respect to the rhetoric, we have different points of view. We debate the Constitution. And my judgment is very clear. The Founding Fathers divested the authority from a centralized government. They wanted it decentralized to the states. So they gave the power to the states, not to the Congress, to elect the next president of the United States. So when they certify their ballots, and there's a timetable for doing this, and they send them to Washington, it's a very sacred ritual. And the idea that we could overturn or go beyond the ballots and second guess them is, quite frankly, where the constitutional analysis was flawed, and I think, quite frankly, manipulated towards a certain goal that we knew was never going to happen. And when it didn't happen, that's when the crowd got violent.
So we have a couple minutes left, and this is my last question, and I'll start with Congressman Veasey. If you could wave a wand and get any bill through in this session of Congress, what would it be?
We need to pass restore the voting rights bill. I'm really worried, and especially as chair of the Voting Rights Caucus in the U.S. House of Representatives, I worry about the need to continue to want to fuel this this sort of mob that we saw at the Capitol. With rhetoric around people cheating around voting, something as Black Americans, something that we've dealt with since Reconstruction ended. These crazy rumors about Black voters cheating. You go back to 1915, Birth of a Nation, blockbuster hit in 1915. where people said that, Black people were just rampantly out there, cheating and voting. And that's why we have the problems that we do. And so for me, us being able to pass that bill and have some sort of fairness when it comes to these laws that are meant to roll back people's rights to vote and participate in our electoral process, I think is important. And the same with redistricting. There has just been on Black and brown communities in Texas, there have just been almost a zeal to split our communities or to pack our communities and to make it to where our voices can only be heard in a few places. And that's bad, especially in a state where most of the growth is being fueled by Hispanic and African American constituencies. And so for me, being able to pass that bill, I think is the most important. And hopefully we can move further and further away from a lot of the racial angst and hatred that we saw, which to me, that's really what 90% of what we saw on January the 6th was really all about. And so I really think that restoring the Voting Rights Act will help continue to move us in that direction, maybe slowly, but surely.
And Congressman McCaul, if you could wave a wand, what bill would you pass?
Well, for me, and I agree with Mark, the nation needs to heal. But for me, I chair the China task force. I see the threats coming out of our foreign nation adversaries, the Chinese Communist Party being one of them. And that is to maintain a technology competitive edge against what they are doing today. Our advanced semiconductor chips are found in everything from cell phones to our F-35 fighter planes. They are so critical to our national security. We need to decouple this from China and nations vulnerable to China and move this manufacturing either back into the United States or to our allied nations to produce these advanced semiconductor chips. They're the brains behind everything that we do. And then they go into artificial intelligence as well. This is going to be key in our long-term struggle against what's going to be the greatest long-term threat to our national security. The Chips for America Act that I introduced has gotten great bipartisan support. I was named by Georgetown the most bipartisan member from Texas, and Mark is probably right there with me, because you can't be productive or constructive if you can't work across the aisle. So I was able to get Mark Warner in the Senate. I was able to get Nancy Pelosi in the House. She has Silicon Valley. I've got Austin Tech in my community. Schumer's got, Global Founders in New York. And this is all really starting to come together. Cornyn and I passed this authorization on the National Defense Authorization Bill. What we need now is the grant money and the investment tax credit that will incentivize these manufacturers of the advanced semiconductor chips to relocate and build here in the United States, which will bring both manufacturing and jobs to the United States, while at the same time protecting our national security.
And with that, we are out of time. Thank you to our viewers for tuning in, and thank you to Congressman Veasey and Congressman McCaul for joining us. Both are serious-minded members of the delegation and held in regard by members of their own party and by the opposition. For more coverage from the Texas Tribune, please visit texastribune.org or sign up to get the latest news from Washington, D.C. with our weekly newsletter at trib.it/Washington. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.